Welcome back. Where we left off last time, Brutus had brought the Trojans, now Britons, to Britain, and settled them there. Now Ignog gave Brutus 3 sons, whose names were Locrin, Albanact, and Camber. When Brutus eventually died, these sons divided the land between them. Locrin, the eldest, took the main part of the island, Camber took the west, and Albanact took the north. They named the 3 parts Logria, Cambria, and Albany after themselves. For a long while there was peace between the brothers. This was interrupted, however, when an army of Huns arrived on ships in Albany. The Huns, led by a man known as King Humber, engaged in battle with Albanact, killing him and destroying his forces. They then proceeded to loot and pillage the land, causing many people to flee south into Logria. When Locrin heard what happened in the north, he, together with his brother, gathered his forces and began to march north. The armies met for a battle near a large river. The battle was fought hard, but Locrin was eventually victorious. King Humber tried to flee across the river, but drowned in the attempt. From that point forward, the river was known as the River Humber after him. When Locrin arrived at the ships that the Huns had arrived on, he found 3 beautiful damsels aboard, one of whom was the daughter of the King of Germany, who had been kidnapped by the Huns. Her name was Estrodus. Locrin fell in love with her at first sight, and announced that he intended to marry her. When news of this reached Cornwall, Kyrenius, the old friend of Brutus, was outraged. Locrin had previously agreed that he would marry Kyrenius' own daughter. He travelled to Locrin and met with the king whilst brandishing his battle-axe, and threatened vengeance if Locrin broke his word. Locrin, now afraid of the Cornishman's wrath, gave in to Kyrenius' demands, and so he was married to Kyrenius' daughter, Gwendoline. However, he did not forget his love for Estrodus. When he returned to Trinobantum, he built a secret underground chamber for Estrodus, where she would be kept and looked after by servants. Still fearing Kyrenius, he kept her secret for 7 years, although he visited her regularly. When people asked as to where he kept going, he would say he was off to make sacrifices to the gods. During this time, Estrodus bore Locrin a beautiful daughter called Sabrina. Queen Gwendoline also became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was called Madden. When Madden was older, he was sent to Cornwall, where he was raised under the care of Kyrenius, who taught him much about the world. Years later, Kyrenius eventually died. After this, Locrin deserted Gwendoline and raised Estrodus to be his queen. Gwendoline was outraged by this and travelled to Cornwall, where she began to recruit men and build up an army. With this army, she began raiding the lands of Locrin. Eventually, Locrin raised an army of his own and marched out to fight her. During the battle that followed, Locrin was hit by a stray arrow and died, leaving Gwendoline victorious. She then ordered that Estrodus and Sabrina be killed by being flung into the nearby river. The river from that point on was known as the Sabrin, after Sabrina, although the name today has shifted slightly, and it is now known as the River Severn. Gwendoline ruled the realm for over 15 years until her son Madden came of age. Then she conferred the rule of the kingdom onto him and retired to just rule over Cornwall for the rest of her life. During this time, Camber died, presumably without an heir, as his kingdom was reunited with the rest of the Isle. It's not very clear though. The book I'm basing this on just kind of forgets about him, so there we are. Madden's reign was a peaceful one, and the kingdom prospered for 40 years whilst he ruled over it. During that time, his wife bore him 2 sons, Remprisius and Malum. After Madden eventually died, disagreements arose between the 2 sons as to which of them should control the kingdom. Tensions saw high between them. However, Remprisius sent a messenger to Malum, claiming that he wanted to avoid bloodshed and that they should meet to negotiate. When Malum arrived, Remprisius broke his word and attacked, slaying his brother where he stood. Remprisius now ruled, but he was a cruel and tyrannical king. He hunted down any relatives who could dispute his rule and made people fear him. After 20 years of his reign, whilst out on a hunting trip, Remprisius ended up separated from the rest of his companions. There he came across a pack of wolves, who ended up killing and eating him. After his death, Abaricus, son of Remprisius, took the throne. Abaricus was a man of great power and strength, who ruled reasonably well. During his time, he gathered ships and raided the coast of Gaul, sacking several cities and returning to Britain with much treasure. He also founded 2 cities in the north, Caerbuac and Alclad. Now, Abaricus had 20 sons with 20 different wives, and also had 30 daughters. Most of them don't matter to this story though. The only one we need to concern ourselves with is his oldest son, Brutus Greenshield, who inherited the kingdom. Now you would think with an epic name like Brutus Greenshield, this guy would be an exciting and great king. However, you would be wrong. He didn't really get up to much. He just reigned for 12 years and died, passing the throne to his son, Lear. Lear was a peaceful man, and the realm prospered under him. During his reign, he founded a city in the north of Britain called Caerleon. Lear ruled for 25 years. Towards the end of his reign, he became old and weak. Some of the nobles in the land saw this as an opportunity to take more power for themselves, and began a rebellion against him. Lear died not long later. His son Hudibras then took power and put an end to the rebellion. Not wanting to miss out on the founding cities trend, Hudibras founded 3, KLM, Caerguen, and the fortress of Bladud. After 39 years he died, passing the throne to his son, Bladud. Now Bladud was a bit unusual compared to some of the other kings we've seen. He started his reign rather normally, founding the city of Caerguen. Taking advantage of the natural springs there, he built the hot baths for the people and a large temple in honour of the goddess Minerva. Over time though, Bladud began to lose the plot a bit, he began practicing dark arts such as necromancy. This all came to an end when he announced that he believed he was capable of flying. Bladud ordered craftsmen to create wings for him. Then, at the top of the temple of Apollo in Trinobantum, he jumped off the roof, flapping his wings. Thus ended the 25-year reign of Bladud. The throne then passed to Bladud's son, Lear. Lear ruled over the kingdom for the next 60 years, and during that time he founded the city of Lear. Lear had a problem though. In fact, he didn't have any sons to inherit his kingdom. Instead, he had 3 daughters. Therefore, he decided that the kingdom would be divided up between the daughters and their husbands after his death. Before he did this though, he brought his 3 daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, before him, and asked them how much they loved him. The first 2 daughters, Goneril and Regan, flattered the king and told him they loved him greatly. Lear was pleased by this and arranged them to be married to the Duke of Albany and the Duke of Cornwall. Cordelia, on the other hand, refused to flatter the king, believing that she should not have to make special assurances of her love. Lear was furious about this and decided to deny Cordelia any inheritance in the kingdom. Now, at this time, Anagrippus, king of the Franks, had heard tales of Cordelia's great beauty, and he decided that he wanted to marry her, regardless of the fact that she had been disinherited. And so, an agreement was made with Lear, and she was sent off to Gaul to marry the king of the Franks. As time went on, Lear became old and weak. Then his first 2 daughters, Goneril and Regan, along with their husbands, revolted against him and seized power for themselves. After they secured power, an agreement was made where Lear would be allowed to stay on the throne, but without any authority. He would also be allowed a retinue of 16 knights to guard him. For the time being, the king lived in the household of the Duke of Albany. Whilst he was there, Goneril decided that she disliked all the knights her father was receiving, and so persuaded her husband to reduce the number down to 30. Lear was outraged by this and travelled to the household of the Duke of Cornwall, hoping that he would receive better treatment there. A year later, Regan also complained to her husband about the number of knights that Lear had in his retinue, and again it was reduced, this time just down to 5 knights. Greatly distressed, Lear left and once more travelled to Albany, in the hopes that his first daughter would have a change of heart and take pity on him. She did not, however, and told Lear that if he was to stay here, he would have to make do with just a single knight in his service. His spirit broken, Lear complied with her demands. After a while in misery, Lear began to think of his third daughter, who was now with the Franks. He doubted that he would get better treatment there, due to the way he had treated her, but he decided to risk it. He fled Albany in secret, travelling south and crossed the Channel, entering Gaul. There he travelled to the city where Cordelia lived, and sent a messenger to inform her of what happened to him. Cordelia was greatly distressed by what she heard, and wept bitterly. She gave the messenger lots of silver and gold, and told him to take her father to another city, feigning that he was a sick man, and clothe and nurse him. She also told him to use the money to gather a retinue of 40 knights to guard him, but once he was at full strength, he should announce his arrival to her husband Anagrippus. The messenger followed her instructions, and a couple of weeks later, much healthier and better dressed King Lear presented himself before King Agrippus. He told Anagrippus that he had been driven out of his kingdom by his sons-in-law and pleaded for assistance. Anagrippus announced that he would help, and that he intended to restore Lear to his former dignity. He sent messengers to his allies all across Gaul, calling for every knight that they could spare. Soon a large army was gathered under Anagrippus, and they set sail for Britain. There was a large battle which took place, in which Lear led the charge against his sons-in-law. After much fighting, Lear was victorious. His enemies were slain, and he took the throne once more. After this, Lear lived another 3 years before dying. Anagrippus died the same year, leaving Cordelia to become Queen of Britain. Cordelia governed the kingdom in peace for 5 years, but then problems began to occur. The sons of her sisters, Margan, son of Maglanus, and Cunedag, son of Henvin, had inherited their dukedoms following the deaths of their fathers, and sought to take vengeance. They gathered their forces and rebelled against the queen. The pair were successful in several battles against Cordelia, and eventually captured and imprisoned her. Cordelia felt much grief at the loss of her kingdom, and ended her life not long later. Now in control of their kingdom, Margan and Cunedag divided it between them, with Margan taking the lands north of the Humber, and Cunedag taking the lands to the south. This system worked for 2 years, but then Margan began to become envious of Cunedag, and declared he had the right to the whole island, as he was the eldest of the two. Encouraged by the support of some lesser nobles around him, Margan marched with an army into Cunedag's territories, sparking a new war. Cunedag led his own forces out to meet Margan, and soon won a decisive victory against him. Margan fled, but Cunedag pursued. eventually tracking Margan down to a small village in the southwest and slaying him. From that point on, the village where he died was known as Margam. Now fully victorious, Cunedag ruled over the whole island as king and had a prosperous 33-year reign. When Cunedag died, his son, Dunvallo, inherited the throne. Now here we have a whole load of kings to get through. Dunvallo passed the throne to his son, Cunedagius. Cunedagius passed it to his son, Cecilius, who then passed it to Cunedagius' nephew, Lego, who then passed it to Cecilius' son, King Lear, and then it went to his son, Bladud. Yeah, none of these people really did anything of note, so it's fine to skip over them. Now Bladud had two sons, Ferrex and Porrex, and when Bladud grew old, there was a dispute between them as to who should rule as king after him. Porrex began to plot to have Ferrex assassinated. However, Ferrex soon got word of the plot and fled to Gaul. There he met with King Sard of the Franks, who agreed to help him, like King Lear had done once before. Ferrex crossed back into Britain with an army of Franks and fought a battle. However, this time Porrex was successful. His brother was slain and the Franks were defeated. Now Wyden, the mother of the brothers, had loved Ferrex greatly, and when she heard he had been slain, she developed a hatred in her heart for the other son. During the night, after the battle, she, with her maids, entered the tent where Porrex was sleeping, and together they hacked into pieces. Thus ended the line of Brutus. This left the kingdom without any clear heirs to the throne, and so chaos ensued. There was much fighting as various nobles fought to claim the throne for themselves. Soon the realm was broken into smaller kingdoms who regularly warred against each other. In these days, a youth of great prowess and skill emerged. His name was Dunvallo, son of King Cloten of Cornwall. Upon his father's death, Dunvallo took the throne and immediately invaded the lands of Ymna, king of Logria. There he was victorious, slaying Ymna in battle. When this happened, Rudaic, the king of Cambria, and Stata, the king of Albany, took counsel together and formed an alliance. They gathered their forces and marched south, seeking to put a stop to Dunvallo. Dunvallo marched up to meet them, bringing 30,000 men. The battle that took place was hard fought, with neither side making any significant gain. But towards the end of the day, Dunvallo gathered around him 600 of his bravest followers and charged into the enemy. They broke through the enemy ranks, eventually reaching the place where Rudaic and Stata were commanding their own men. In the fighting, the two enemy kings were slain, allowing Dunvallo to claim victory. The rest of the enemy forces were scattered, and over the following months, Dunvallo marched his armies into their lands to claim them as his own. After this, Dunvallo had secured the whole island for himself and ruled as king. To celebrate his victory, he had made for himself a golden crown. Dunvallo's reign was a long and successful one, and over the next 40 years, he became known as a great lawmaker. Now that is where we shall leave today's story. I hope you enjoyed it. There will be many more kings to come in the following episodes, starting with the sons of Dunvallo. It's going to be great. As a side note, as some of you may have noticed, the King Lear in today's story was the original inspiration for Shakespeare's King Lear. So I suppose that's pretty good. Alright then. Well, until next time, farewell.